Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited about today's presentation. And we've got Jarel here. He's going to teach us all about React Query, which I personally have never used, so I'm really curious to learn all about it. I told Jarel what a React fan I am. Kidding, sort of. But I'd use it all the time, even if I complain about it all the time. But before we get started, I'm going to run through some quick slides here because I want to say thank you to our sponsors because, as you all may know, it takes a lot to kind of run something like this every couple of weeks. As we do, we run 2 of these events a month, and the sponsors are what make it so that I don't go broke while doing it. So I appreciate them. So first of all, we've got Stratic. If you're doing WordPress and you want to convert that to like a Jamstack site with all the bells and whistles, like dynamic forms and all kinds of dynamic other capabilities, that's what Stratic will do. It's really, really cool. So sign up at stratic.com/signup. And I don't know if any of you got to see the presentation by Covery the other day, but Covery is really it's a really cool platform for deploying like full stack apps to AWS. It'll handle all of the nuts and bolts for you. They released their beta only a few months ago. You really should check it out. It looks really cool. They're building something pretty awesome. And then Netlify, which I actually host on Netlify, and a lot of you know I'm a big Jamstack fan, so I really appreciate Netlify's support in allowing me to do these meetups. So I do have some upcoming events, well, one in particular that I'm super, super excited about. In just 2 weeks, we're doing the jam.dev. Hopefully some of you made it last year. But this is year 2. It's a virtual event. It's 2 days, all about the Jamstack. And the best part is it's now completely free. So I charged for it last year, and we started out charging for it this year, but we actually ended up going completely free because we got some great sponsors that made it possible to do that. So I'm super excited about that everybody gets the opportunity to go. So just go to thejam.dev and sign up. And you get 2 days worth of Jamstack stuff, plus access to all the recordings, all of it completely free. And we have a really, really great speaker lineup. I'm super excited about it. So hopefully I'll see you there. As usual, if you got feedback, please email me at brian@cfe.dev. I'd love to hear from you. If you love this presentation, if you really like the site, if you want to speak, all those things I love to hear. And if you have any criticism, I'm happy to hear that too, even if it may hurt. But so yeah, feel free to email me. This session is recorded, so you can come back to the same URL you're at right now, and you'll be able to see the recording of this session as soon as the session's over. In addition, I will probably in the next week or 2 post an edited version that will be up on the site, so you can see that in about a week or 2 as well. So recording will be available right away. And just a reminder that speaking of recordings, I put 130. I need to update this slide. I just posted all the sessions from More Serverless as well. So like we're probably up to like 160 something sessions at this point that are all free from 4+ years of doing this. So anyway, they're all there available to you. You can go back and watch. We've got practically every topic that's important to a developer is there, and it's free. So that's it for my slides. Obviously, there's more to come. We do have a February 1 schedule. It's going to be February 10th at 1 p.m. I'm going to share more details. Should be announcing that within the next couple days. I'm excited about that. You can follow us on Twitter at CFE_dev and Instagram at CFE_dev as well. And that is it for my intro. I'm going to turn it over to Jarel, who's going to teach us about managing remote state in React.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, everyone, I'm Jarel. Thank you all for tuning in. Hear me talk a little bit about React Query and just remote state in React and how to manage it in your side of your applications. So We're gonna go ahead and get started. Here's a little bit about me. So I'm Jarel. I'm 25, out of Alabama. I'm a senior software engineer and technical lead at Common Bond. As you can see, I am married to my lovely wife. We've been married now a year, so COVID wedding. We are expecting our first child here on April 3rd. It's going to be a little girl. In terms of some things I like to do in my spare time, I'm an avid reader, so I love reading books. I'm also playing video games nowadays. I got into the wild goose chase of trying to get a PS5, so I ended up getting one, and so I'm playing Ratchet and Clank and Spider-Man on PlayStation. If you want to reach out to me, find me on the web. That's my handle tag right there. You can reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, GitHub, all at the Fryer, THA Fryer. And then that's my personal website. So www.jarelfryer.dev. And that's, a bunch of information that you can use to get in touch with me. So we're going to dive right into it, right? And I think every good presentation has to start off with like an interesting quote. At least that's my opinion, right? So this quote really resonated me as I was kind of, preparing and getting ready to share with you all. We shape our tools, and afterwards our tools shape us, right? So this quote was very interesting to me, right? As builders, as developers, engineers, right? We're often building the next tool or building the next technology because we want to make our lives better. We want to make the lives of other people better, right? So, right, if you think about the advent of the web, we start off with very much server-side running applications, right? A lot of applications were built with PHP, and they were serving HTML templates, right? When you might have some out there that were doing Python and whatnot, but the web has started to transcend, right? We moved from the days of jQuery and whatnot, and now we kind of have these different SPA frameworks or single page application frameworks, right? So we have React and Vue and Svelte and Angular and a myriad of many more. And what's something that's interesting about these tools, as the creators created these tools, it shaped our problems. It shaped how we decided we wanted to tackle building our applications, right? If you're coming from Angular world, right? Angular is very much, it has a library supported way to manage, state, styling, many other different facets of the application. Vue is a very similar way. Then as you peel back the layer, you go towards Svelte, and then React on the end of that. React being a library, the creators, with them shaping that tool, they wanted it to be very open-ended, right? I could choose, how I could style every application I do differently. I could, do state management differently. I could do all these different things differently, and it really created a boom for creators. So the real big thing that I want to talk about today is that when you deciding how to build your React application specifically, is state, right? We have, in every application, you really think about, if I'm getting ready to do something, I have to save this piece of information. If we're talking like the theme, or maybe it's a user's email, or maybe it's a response from an API, right? My front-end application has to manage all of these different states, right? And the way I like to think of it in general, we have sets of state that kind of live in our front-end application. Then we have the server state, right? If we're talking about the state that's living in that application, we might be talking about the router, the URL of the application. We might be talking about, if you're talking React world, to use state hook. You might be talking about, browser storage, which is local storage, session storage, cookies, right? There's all different forms of state there that are in the browser that live in the app world that the app can kind of control and be the owner of, right? But then you kind of have this world of server state, which is where the server really is the source of truth. The server really owns everything about this data, right? And so when we start looking at most of our applications that we're building on the web, at the end of the day, majority of our state really is state that's owned by the server. We're talking like data that we're trying to get into our applications and to show something to our end users. So that brings us to the real thing that we're looking at in our applications, which is really asynchronous remote data, right? Asynchronous remote data, meaning data that I have to get from a remote location where the server is the source of truth, right? But there's some things about this asynchronous remote data that I have to retrieve from the server that become gotchas, right? If there's a change to that data, right? If someone on their front end makes a change, or they make a mutation, or they make a post API call or put, that data now changes, right? So in my application, I might not have the latest data anymore. It might become stale. When we talk about dealing with asynchronous remote data, in your applications, you get into a world of like, all right, how am I caching these requests? How am I deduplicating a lot of these requests? There's a lot of different things that you start to think about when you get into terms of managing your remote data. So like looking at this on the base level, if I'm doing this in React, what does managing my asynchronous remote data look like, right? So at a very basic level, right, if I'm not using Redux, if I'm not using XState, Mobex, a lot of these other, global state solutions, or Jotai, Recore, if I'm not using anything, I'm just using the basics, batteries included pieces of building, managing remote state in React. I'm using these use state hooks, right? So I know I might have a hook that kind of manages the data, which is the post, right? I might have a use state that's handler is going to manage the error or the state of whichever my API call is in, right? So then I also have to have a use effect call here that's going to actually call my query function, right? So when I'm making my actual API request to get post, right? And then this function here is going to start orchestrating this state, right? So when you get into thinking about this, right, in one single component or one single page, you can have, you can be making 5 or 6 API calls to get data from different locations, right? Especially if you're in a REST world. If you're in a GraphQL world, maybe, it's where I'm only making one API call and I'm getting all these data back from these different data sources. But if we're looking at this from a REST standpoint, right, I might have 5 API calls from 5 different services, right? And I have to manage all of that inside of these pages and these components, right? So then now I have all these different forms, this a lot of code here now that could kind of be an overload from someone coming in and entering it. So like I think there's something about React Query here. It comes in and it provides a nice simple hooks based API, right? I think it provides a very small footprint but has some aggressive but same defaults that allow us to really manage our remote state in a way that's going to allow us to build applications simpler, quicker, and much more effectively. So let's move to the code. Let's get right to the code. That's what everybody wants to see, really, right? So what is this? What does this look like? So, right, I'm here. I'm using this nice little Rick and Morty API, and this is what we took this base batteries included way of fetching state in React applications. And what we're going to do here, when I run this application, as you see, and I visit my local 3000 traditional page here, and you'll see it was a little different than the other one. I want to highlight a few things in the network request, right? The networks tab, right? So, you're going to see here in this API call, we're making one API call out here to get this list of characters, okay? We have our list of characters, and you see that this is the standard way that we would do, getting this remote state. When I look at, taking this and wanting to look like React Query, or you leveraging React Query, in the world of React Query, we have these hooks, right? There's a set of hooks, and the one that you're going to use a lot is the use query hook, okay? So use query hook, when you use it, there's use query. It kind of has this mechanism that's going to apply a cache to your query function. So that's two parts that make up this query. You have the key, the query key, which we'll talk more about a little bit later, and then you have the query function, right? And along with this, I could override some defaults, right? So I could, pass a lot of different other items here, like enable, use error boundary, notify on change props inclusion, a bunch of different other pieces that I'm going to fill out this picture of what we think about when we're managing our remote state. So when we look at this in terms of just what this looks like in the front end, the UI, right? We see that we're making this. We still have this one API call right here, and React Query. When you're doing development, it has these nice little dev tools that you can use, right? So you can see, you can see the data. You can also see some of the things that React Query is managing for you. And this is where I go back in. You're going to see the power React Query. It manages these queries using a cache, right? So it's going to have this cache, and you're going to see here that it, saves this query that I just called with this key and a hash. And you're going to see as we do more queries, it's going to make sense as to why the importance of this cache that React Query kind of manages for you, right? And then we'll look at some of these defaults, right? So these options here that we talked about earlier, I was mentioning just a little bit. You see that this is the query key. Doesn't really provide the function here in the UI, but there's a lot of different factors that you can see about your query with this dev tool. That's a cool thing about this library that I really like. So also, as we kind of dive down, we continue to go down the rabbit hole of React Query, you'll see like there are some functions to where if I need to refetch a query, I can refetch, right? If I invalidate this query, invalidate the cache, you're going to see another API call was made right here, right? And I'll do it one more time just so you can see another one. I can invalidate the cache, and it's going to say, okay, boom, you need to go get this data again. Okay, and we're going to see how these pieces can kind of come in and make our applications much more optimistic in terms of making updates and a few more nice pieces. Okay, so that's what a query looks like in general. But let's see some of the benefits of doing a query like this with React Query. So I'm going to go back to a traditional this traditional way that we do it, right? So you see here, I have the traditional state that I'm saving to my application, and I'm making a API call. Okay. What I did on this page specifically is that I am doing two of these components, right? And there's going to be something that you see here about this. There's this RM episode. So it's Rick and Morty. These are Rick and Morty characters if you haven't noticed already. And in these Rick and Morty characters, there's an episode for each one, right? There's a list of episodes that they play in, right? So I have this nice little episode component here that actually also hosts a query that makes an API call to get episode details. Okay, so it's going to get the episode name, right? And we also have a traditional version of that. So we got the traditional version and the React Query version. But I want to show some key things to look at when you see the traditional version. So we're gonna look at this traditional version here. Okay, so something interesting that I want to bring your attention to is that here in the API request, I see that I make one API request for all these episodes. I have Morty Smith and I have Rick Sanchez up here. And you see there's 51 episodes showing for each of them, right? But you're looking here and you're seeing there's one API call here, and this gets Rick. There's a second API call, and this gets Morty. And then you see all 51 API calls for that episode. But something that's interesting that you notice that there's not a second set of API calls to get episode details for Morty. And why is that? Well, something interesting to think about, and my URL is a little off, but React Query is deduplicating some of these requests for us, right? So if I go in here and let's change traditional character so that you can see those API requests happen. All right. Not dedupe. And we'll change it to traditional. So make sure that he's exported the correct way. All right. And then for the sake of our friends here, make API call. So cool. So something interesting that you're going to see now, and I intentionally did these in different styles. You see that now I removed the React query version of the episode. You're seeing now that there's 2 sets of API calls that's made for each character, right? So and that's what we would expect if we were doing it the normal way without React query. But now we're seeing now that React query dedupes these requests for us, and if we're saying, okay, I'm worried that these requests are, this data is stale, I can come in and I can leverage, the invalidate queries function that we're going to see in the API of React query here in a few moments. Okay, so those are a few examples. I think one more that I want to show off here, and that's to think about, is when I go back and we're going to go back to the normal page that's using React query. Okay, when I go to an individuals page, right? So we're going to go view Abadango Cluster Princess, right? We're going to go view his page, and we'll see he's only in 1 episode. He's only in episode 6 here, I think. Excuse me. He's only episode 27, which is rest and relaxation. So that's the only API call that gets made for this guy here. What we see now, if we go look at the characters specifically, there's this query key that we can do. And with query keys, as you look at the React query docs, you'll see that there's an array that I can pass, right? And what you'll see is that this allows each query to be unique, but I can also invalidate the cache for all of these characters. So for example, we'll see it here in a second, and I'll play around with some mutations. But if I go to Rick here and I open my nice little React query dev tools, you'll see now that we see each query coming in through these dev tools. We see all the data, and I can, refetch that specific one and validate that specific one. I can invalidate the character, and it'll make all those API calls again. But what you're gonna see here with these with the arrays, you can also just invalidate the episodes key, and it will invalidate all those episode queries. So let's add a button here, just to show that. So I'm going to add, what's his name? Let's say invalidate button. Right? And with React query, we'll look at the docs here in a second and talk about some of the APIs and how it kind of works in the background. Okay, so let's do query client. Yeah. I'm going to do episodes. All right. So here's something I want to see to show off this invalidate functionality here. So when I click this invalidate function button here, you're going to see that all those API calls were made here again in the request tab. I'll do it one more time, just so you can see. And they're all made again. So the cool thing is, instead of doing one of these specific keys here, I was able to invalidate all of the episodes because of this array functionality of doing the query key, right? I could come back and, do it specifically, and I can, invalidate the 25th one. So if I click my nice little invalidate button here, if I click it now, we should say that my 25th one gets invalidated. Cool. So that's what that invalidate queries functionality does, and it can allow you to invalidate the cache to make sure the cache doesn't get stale, and you can do that imperatively, right? But if we go look at the nice React query docs, we can come through here and see if we look at the API for use query. There's these set of defaults that you can kind of override here, right? And they allowed you to add a lot of different functionality here and there. Some of the ones that are really interesting in terms of managing the cache or like updating that data is refetch interval. So you can, if you do refetch interval, it'll keep refetching that on a certain interval time, a set of time, different time. Goodness gracious, lost my set of words there. But different time intervals. You also have the stale time, which sets when the cache becomes stale. And then the cache time is also which sets how long we're going to save this entry in the cache before I need to make another API request, right? So we got those few keys there. We have a lot of different other ones that provide some different value. We talked about the query key and the query function. A cool one is the enabled key, which allows us to say, all right, this API call doesn't get made until X criteria is made. Or, you can talk about, you got the retry key, which sets the amount of retries. And right. So we talk about, when I was saying some of these same but aggressive important defaults the React query sets for you, right? It handles retry, exponential back off on API calls for you. You can, disable, enable them as you so please. We talked about caching them, background updates. There's a lot of cool things that React query handles for you, right? Key thing to note over here, you'll probably see it in my browser over here. You see my mouse. You can also use it in React Native, and that'll show you a nice little code snippet on that page. Okay, so there's one more hook that I want to show here, and then I'll explain just a little bit. I think kind of dive into just explaining how I would get it set up in the application. Okay, so we were looking at queries just now, and queries are pretty much get calls, right? They're all those are pretty much our get. If we're getting information from our resources, those are making get calls to our different services. Okay, but the mutations, which are puts, patches, post, delete request, all those different things, we want to use mutation hook. Okay, so I set up a nice little example here that shows us the combination of this query along with our use mutation hook. So I got our use query. We see our query key here is to-dos. And I also have, the query function here, as you can see, is getting the data for the to-dos. And then I have our mutation. And we'll talk about a key difference of the mutation that you'll see here is that it does not have a mutation key set on it. But it does have kind of a mutation function. And then you see this nice little object of different things. And we'll talk about what's happening in that object here. Okay. So let's go see what this does in the front end. Okay. So let's go to our mutation page. Okay. So I got me a nice little input here. We'll go ahead and type out fix breakfast, and because that's the first to do that I want to do today. So we create it, and you see here, there's a post, and there's another get to get that new to do. We'll come here and we'll go get car wash. Okay. So you see, it's something interesting that you're noticing here. With this mutation pattern that I have. Every time I make a post, after that post, it's doing a get call for me. And the key thing that we're going to see here is that when you come back and look at this, what I'm doing here, I'm specifically doing an optimistic update. Okay. And what I mean by that is an optimistic update is it makes the update with the intentions that from the back end, you're going to get back successful data, right? So watch this. So what I'm doing here in its own mutate function, after I, someone makes before they make the API call, it'll set the text to empty. We'll cancel the queries before it actually makes the API call. We'll get the previous data and we set it synchronously with this query data, right? So this allows us to do an optimistic update, which is I can make the UI continue going on without waiting on the response from the back end. But when I actually get the response from the back end, whether it was an error or it was, it ended up being successful, unsettled, I can actually invalidate the queries and it makes that API call again for me, right? So you see me here invalidating that query of to-dos, and that API call is getting made here again. So I'll show you guys that one more time. Let's see, to do, write some tech tickets. As you see here, there's that post, and then there's that get that's made immediately after, right? So that's the what I showed there was more of an optimistic update, but you could also do this with just the query key here. So you could just set the, let me see if I have an example with using the query key. That might have changed in the APIs. Okay, but what I did was, as you saw there in the code here, when I invalidated those queries on the unsettled, it went back and said, okay, let's get the latest data from the server. Okay, so that's really cool. I think that'll gives us some powerful mechanisms, but it also does it in a little bit simpler way, right? If you're looking in the Redux, if you're thinking in the Redux mindset, right, I have to, set up actions. I have to set up reducers and whatnot to kind of get to the point where I have all this data inside of my Redux store. With X state and some other different functions, other different state libraries, they all have their own separate way of managing remote state. But I see React Query as a very clean, crystal clear API. So if you're looking for some resources, some resources to kind of figure out, play around with React Query, you can review the docs that I just showed off. There's a guy, I don't even know his real name, but it's TK Dodo out of Europe. But he has a blog on practical React Query, and he provides a whole bunch of tips and tricks that really help you to leverage React Query and use it in your applications. It's a really cool blog. I suggest you all check it out. And if you're more into the kind of, you need a course, a structured learning environment, the creator of the library, Tanner Lindsley, created a course to walk you through the essentials of React Query and show you more about React Query. So that's all I had for today. I'm going to check the chat here for some questions.
Sorry. I said that it looks like there was a question that got deleted, but I got some questions, and while I ask you questions, hopefully people will bring up their questions. So first of all, that was great. I'll be honest, I have not used React Query before, so but actually watching that, I'm like, oh, I probably should. So my first question before I get to the audience questions is there a situation in which you would not use React Query? Like is this something you use every time you need to do any kind of API calls, or are there situations where this would not be a good fit?
I think, if I'm looking at React Query and thinking through some of the use cases, for me, I would probably say that cases where it may not make sense for me is if I'm highly into the Apollo GraphQL environment, right? Where, they have the Apollo Federation, a lot of cool things happening there with the Apollo cache, because, you can do GraphQL with React Query, but that Apollo environment is so powerful and they have a lot of cool tools and things there that I would probably leverage that if I was using the Apollo toolkit tool chain to build out my API.
So you think they would kind of conflict with each other? They have overlapping feature sets, is what you're saying?
Yes, they have a very much overlapping feature sets. So there's React Query adds, some different cool things under the hood and whatnot that are really powerful and that you can actually leverage outside of React. If you're talking like the query client, if you're talking like query observers, you can take that base level underlying API that's outside the hooks and reuse it in other languages. So like to take for another example, right? If I'm a team that's using multiple frameworks, maybe React Query does not make as much sense, right? If I want to stay to a agnostic set of like, hey, I want to be able to reuse this, in Spelt World or in View World, and those patterns are a lot different, right? But that's not the majority of teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably there's a lot of cases if I'm doing a REST API, I would highly suggest using React Query. There's another library out there called SWR, and it's made by the Vercel team. They have a nice little powerhouse squad of developers over there. But as you can see, it has that nice little Vercel look. But it pretty much takes this stale while we validate pattern, which is what React Query is kind of doing to an extent also, and is returning the data and making it much more giving that cache to the front end. So there's a few other libraries out there that are in this space. I'm just a fan of React Query. I've used it in my current role. I've used it in my previous role. I've probably been using it since maybe version. I think I've been using it since the second version. I think Tanner's on the third version of React Query now, third major version. So I've been about a 2-3 year long user. So
Awesome. Okay. We do have a couple questions from the audience. So first of all, and hopefully you don't hear the bird going crazy. I have birds and dogs going crazy right here, right now. So first question is, have you used any of the real-time features in React Query?
I have not. And with that being said, like I think it makes sense for some people to use it, but for me, right, our applications have not been as advanced where I feel like I need a lot of the real-time functionality, right? They have React Query also provides some stuff like pagination and infinite, that kind of that infinite scroll API look that I just haven't had the use case to use. So
Makes sense.
keep it simple. If you don't need it, don't use it.
Yeah. Okay. And then another question was, you mentioned you can invalidate by key or all. When the cache invalidates, do dependent cache items invalidate as well? Or is that something you need to specify?
So I'm pretty sure pending also invalidate as well. I'm pretty sure it counts with the one that's in progress and then makes out another. Now I probably like reach out and double check on that question, but I'm pretty sure invalidates pending ones also.
Okay. And Sean says that he's using pagination and infinite scroll and it works great. So yeah, that's definitely another thing worth checking out, I guess, if you're that way you don't have to roll it yourself. So I'm assuming like React Query is pretty lightweight, like this is not going to add like a ton of weight to your application or anything.
Yeah, it's around 5 kilobytes, so very lightweight. Not taking up much room in your application. Like if you're pulling in, if you're pulling up in other libraries, you're probably taking up much more bandwidth footprint with some other libraries, but small footprint, it really won't affect your bundle as much in terms of size.
And have you used it much with GraphQL, or have you not used it with GraphQL much?
I played around with it, like, and just some personal, like as you want to push the boundaries of the library, but I haven't used it in like production settings with GraphQL, but I've done like some tests with it. You can use it with GraphQL.
And do you may not know the answer to this, but is there I guess would this be more useful, say, if you're doing both REST and GraphQL than Apollo, or is do you really feel like it's just a matter of taste about which one you choose?
What it's a matter of taste and patterns, like, right? Because with Apollo GraphQL, if I'm want to call a REST endpoint, right, I can set that endpoint up with the resolver and use that resolver to get data from that request. Versus if I'm in React query world, I can just set up another query and call that endpoint in the front end, right? That GraphQL endpoint that way, right? And there's an example here for anybody that wants to go check that out, what it looks like using GraphQL. This is Tanner's pretty robust, expansive docs. But what he's doing here, he has a nice little endpoint for GraphQL, and he's just using the GraphQL request library. And then it's pretty much the same. The only difference in the API is literally that the fetcher function or query function is different, and it supports doing the GraphQL functionality versus actually calling a REST endpoint, right? So I can use it, right? So technically I can use it with SOAP API if I wanted to. You know what I mean? I don't think many people write SOAP APIs.
Nobody wants
don't
to
want
that.
to. Nobody wants to, right? But I could, because this query function is pretty much a promise. So anything that returns a promise, I can technically hook up to React Query.
Okay. That's interesting so he's using GraphQL request to handle actually doing the query to GraphQL. I've used that before. So it's super lightweight, but it's very basic. Like, it's missing a lot of the key features like Apollo, but that makes sense if you're using it combined with this. It kind of ends up maybe mimicking this plus GraphQL request is like a variation on what Apollo offers in a way.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. I don't see any other questions from the audience at this point. I think I honestly looks really cool. I may try and utilize this in some of my applications. Although, I'll admit my applications are pretty simple. I'm building lots of demos and stuff. But I love that little debugger. That was very cool. Because that is something that's it's not always easy to kind of dig into what's getting sent back when you run like I'm often jumping to Postman and doing it there, but this would eliminate the need to like just do anything in Postman. I can just do it here. So that's really awesome. So yeah, I thanks again, Jarel, for your time. Really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for showing up today. And I hope to see you at the jam.dev in 2 weeks. Again, it's free, so no reason why you shouldn't be there if you're already doing Jamstack or you're just curious. Just show up. And JJ Thornton says that was really interesting. Not familiar with React Query, so it's super informative. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, JJ. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.